For more, ABC News foreign correspondent Britt Clennett joining me live from Ukraine's capital city of Kyiv, along with John Parachini, senior international and defense researcher and former director of the RAND Intelligence Policy Center. Great to have you both. So, Britt, martial law now in effect in those 4 Russian-occupied regions of Ukraine as Putin seeks to reinforce his control over the territories. What more are we learning right now?
Well, martial law in this case means tighter security checks and restrictions on movement in those affected areas. But the war has already curbed rights and freedoms for Ukrainians living in those areas. So it's not clear exactly what effect it's going to have on the people living there. On top of that, you know, while it was decreed by President Vladimir Putin on Wednesday, the Russian military does not fully control those 4 regions, let's remember. So what martial law, again, really means in reality is yet to be seen. Heightened security measures are also coming into force across Russia. There will be new restrictions on movement in regions along the Ukrainian border in particular, but the southern and central regions, which includes Moscow, are under a slightly less draconian regime, but still marginally so. You know, Putin appears to be trying to put Russia on this full-scale kind of war footing that he hopes, Kira, will allow it to stem Ukraine's advances and kind of reshape the country so it can weather a long war and outlast Western support as well.
Well, John, Russia is targeting critical infrastructure, as we've reported, with missiles and Iranian-made drones, by the way. Ukraine's President Zelensky speaking about Iran supplying those weapons in a new interview. Let's take a listen.
Все це скасовували. Говорили, що ми нічого не продавали.
They publicly denied all that, saying that we didn't sell anything. But here we see hundreds of strikes at Ukraine, at the capital, at civil infrastructure, at schools, nearby the university, at the university, and the shutting down of our energy system, just for people not to get through the winter, killing people either with hunger that happened blocking off the sea routes, or with cold, with freeze, what they do right now.
Що було на морі, блокування, або холодом, те, що вони зараз роблять.
John, you're an expert on counterterrorism and weapons proliferation. What do you make of Iran supplying these drones and Russia using them to just terrorize civilians? Is there any way to hold Iran accountable? I mean, we saw them do this in Iraq as well.
Yeah, I think we've entered a new tragic phase of this conflict where the Russians have really run out of the missiles that they have been using that have with great effect, and they now have turned to drones, swarms of drones that the Iranians have provided them. The Russians essentially have traded their Su-35s fighter aircraft to Iran in exchange for these missiles or for these drones, and these drones don't provide the same explosive power as the missiles they have been firing thus far, but it's what the Russians have. And of course, when a drone crashes through your apartment building with 80 pounds of explosives, it's a serious event. And it's tragic that they've used these not necessarily for effective control of the battlefield, but really to aim at civilians and Ukrainian infrastructure.
So, John, the U.S. applying its own drones to Ukraine, including those Switchblade devices. How do you compare those to Iran's assets, and what can the U.S. and the West, the entire West, do at this point to counter Iran?
Well, I think the important thing to note is how the Russians have been using the Iranian drones. They've used them in swarms, and the Ukrainians have been reasonably successful at knocking down large portions of these swarms, but not all. Some get through. They're just too many. So I think that's the new development, is how the Russians are using them. The Ukrainians have been very effective at using drones that either we have provided or that they have made themselves or that they have gotten from Turkey, but they haven't used them in the same way that the Iranians have, or that the Russians have used these Iranian drones, which is in these swarms aimed at civilian targets. The Iranians have used them to surveil military targets and to have effectiveness on the battlefield, where the Russians are really changing the nature of the conflict and really making it an aerial terror conflict at the moment.
And Britt, the Biden administration continues to say Vladimir Putin is just resorting to desperate tactics here to try and make new gains in Ukraine. How is Ukraine's military seeing this?
Well, the Ukrainians will say that it shows that Putin's position is weakened, that he's resorting these kind of attacks on civilians, attacks on energy, because he doesn't have a choice, because he's losing in the battlefield in the south and in the east. But Russian missiles, have damaged infrastructure all across Ukraine, including cities like Lviv, far away from the fighting. And now as much as 40%, Kira, of Ukraine's energy infrastructure has been seriously damaged. And that's according to an advisor to the energy minister. So this is a new front of the war we're seeing. It seems Putin is weaponizing energy. And you might notice that it's a little darker behind me. And that's because Ukrainians have been urged to save energy. So they're turning off their lights and their electricity more than they normally would at this time of year, just because they are facing an energy crisis. And let's not forget, it gets bitterly cold here in Ukraine. And winter, the depths of winter, is just around the corner.
And you're there too, Britt Clennett, for us in Ukraine. Also, John Parachini. Appreciate you both today. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.